This week on Off the Air, Joe Buono.
Hello and welcome into another edition of Off the Air, the legacy of WFUV Sports. I'm Andrew Galata alongside Kayla Wenzel, and we're joined today by Joe Buono. He's currently the host of PT Isles for SB Nation's Lighthouse Hockey and runs the NYIslesBlog.com and at IslesBlog on Twitter. Also, he's an SVP in IT Risk and Control at HSBC, kind of, the other side. And then you said like the fun stuff. I love how you said that. And then also Fordham class of 2004 and was a sports manager in 2004 as well. How you doing, Joe?
I'm doing well. Thank you guys so much for thinking of me. I've been watching from afar and very happy that you got so far down the list. I was able to join you.
That's great. We're very happy to have you. And I kind of want to go back all the way to the beginning. And I wanted to ask you, when was the first time you knew you wanted to work in the sports media industry or at FUV and stuff like that?
So massive sports fan growing up in Brooklyn, and like a lot of WFUV broadcasters probably had muted the TV in your childhood bedroom and done play-by-play. I think growing up in New York, you had Marv Albert, you had Bob Murphy, obviously Gary Cohen. So you had some, legendary sports broadcasters. If you weren't playing basketball in your backyard when I was growing up and, yes, and it counts, and do that on your own, you weren't really a fan. I knew I wanted to kind of work in communications and journalism, but I actually started off going to Lincoln Center and commuted my freshman year at Fordham, and I wrote for the Observer. So that's kind of where I felt like I was gonna go. And I didn't know a ton about FUV. I know right now people may come to Fordham for the purpose of working at WFUV. I didn't really know the legacy and the history behind it. And my sophomore year, I started thinking about maybe wanting to go on campus and live away from my parents and move from Brooklyn to the Bronx, as long as I could come home on weekends to get my laundry done and get a meal. And Frank Mentasana, who also was a big part of WFUV. He was a year younger than me, and he went to the same high school as me. So he told me, as I'm a sophomore and he's a freshman, I'm like, hey, can I come up and kind of experience campus life? I'm thinking about maybe transferring up to Rose Hill. He goes, yeah, you can come up, but I just have this workshop thing that I'm doing, this radio thing I'm checking out. It's the first time this guy Dave Sims or someone is going to be doing a workshop. I was like, I know who Dave Sims is. He's like, yeah, so why don't you come? And I'm sure you could come along. I'm sure it's not a big deal. And I got completely hooked. I went to that first workshop and Dave Sims was there, met Bob Aarons for the first time at that class. And, they talked about all the things you guys have heard, the art of play-by-play, painting the word picture. I think Bob said, can anyone describe the room? I raised my hand and I said, it's a square rectangle room with 12 desks and, square lights above us. And Bob will be like, what kind of lights? Fluorescent lights, LED lights? And met Bob afterwards and away I was. And that's how I got involved with FUV and started off really my sophomore year.
So what was one of the first assignments that you got on? Like, what were the first things that you started out with? And then how did you work your way all the way up to sports manager?
So the first thing I ever did was come to cut highlights for a Fordham football game. Andrew Bogus was the play-by-play announcer at the time. And Fordham had a really good team, football team, the years I was there. So I cut some highlights. But our first really big assignment was, Bob had talked about that, he'd go, guys, we do stuff. He would say things like that. And if you were willing to maybe on your own dime, go to an event, they can get you credentialed. So myself, Frank Mentasana, and Rich Savino, who works at MLB Network now, we all got together and said, hey, we'd like to drive down to Florida and cover spring training for the Mets and Yankees. This was the 2002 season. So we drove down in my parents' 1989 Chevy Caprice. We stayed with aunts and family of mine that was down in Florida. We spent 3 days with the Yankees, spent 3 days with the Mets, and I interviewed Roger Clemens and Mike Piazza and Bobby Valentine and Robin Ventura, who I was a big Mets fan, but he was his first year with the Yankees. We got Brian Cashman that trip. We got Steve Phillips. We did a great job and sent back everything to Bob. So that was my first really big event and first time being in a locker room with professionals. And it was really good to do that in spring training because it's a more laxed environment. So you can kind of leave, in the fifth, sixth inning of games, they'll allow you to go, at least they used to allow you to go into the locker room and kind of had an opportunity to really just go right up to players and get a 3 to 5 minute interview with really not much fanfare or hassle. So that was a great first experience for me.
Yeah, that's awesome for first time. What would you say one piece of advice for underclassmen would be at FUV or really any college to try to get, more involved? Because obviously just at FUV, like, all the seniors, all the juniors, they're doing all the play-by-play and that stuff. But maybe as a sophomore, what's one thing you would do to try to get more involved?
I think you want to have a wide range of skill sets. So just because I wanted to be on air and had those aspirations, that didn't mean that I didn't become a producer of one-on-one or do phone screening or learned how to be a board operator or be the on-site engineer. I remember I listened to Mike Yam's off the air that you guys did with him, and he referenced the trip to Ole in New York with St. Bonaventure that season. And I was on that trip. They needed a volunteer and I volunteered, had never done the engineering on site before, but I got to go for 6 days and spend time with Andrew Bogish and Mike Yam and kind of watch them and see how they did and went about their business. And I knew I wanted to eventually be in their shoes. So, volunteer, put yourself out there and always ask a ton of questions. I asked a ton of questions, of course, with Bob, who was really my first ever mentor in life. But a ton of questions to Andrew, a ton of questions to Mike Yam, was very inquisitive and prepared for whatever workshops were happening. And we got, Marv Albert was there. Bob Costas was there. Gary Cohen came back multiple times. Kenny Albert. I made sure I made that time valuable, even if I wasn't yet the person at my junior and senior year that was the play-by-play announcer. And I think you guys, this generation with the advances in technology, even have more opportunities and be able to do that for more sports. So put yourself out there, stretch yourself. You'll never know ultimately where you'll find your home. I know Tom Winter, who was a year younger than me, he was our behind the scenes guy. He was our engineer and ended up being an investigative journalist for NBC, doing on-air work, writing. We've had others like Rich Savino, who I mentioned, who is a play-by-play on-air guy, but a producer on TV side for MLB Network. And, guys like Nick Costos, who wanted to do play-by-play, really wasn't his thing, ended up being a producer, now found his niche with gambling. So, that sounds bad, but you know what I mean? He found his niche doing what he's doing now on radio.com. So just kind of cast a very, very wide net and you will find your way.
So you talked about producing versus on air and engineering, and I see that you've done both. You've been a serious producer, but you've also done Fox Sports as a radio correspondent. So I kind of dabble in both. I do both production normally when we're in studio and on air. So what is something that is your favorite? Which one do you prefer to do?
I actually really enjoy both. And, the podcasting I do now on the Islanders side for IslesBlog, and that's kind of been, the thing that I've wrapped my time around in my kind of post, paid for professional life working in broadcasting after I did that for 7, 8, 9 years, because it's up to me to find the guest, to make sure that someone is interesting, that it's a very time relevant or interesting listen for our audience. But then I get to be on the on-air side of things. I think producing, I think you could be a lazy producer, and depending on the situation that you're in with your host, maybe it's not that much, that you dial up the same 2 or 3 people over and over again, bring them on the show, go with your ins and outs of the commercials, and that could be it. But you can be really creative and maybe stretch yourself and go after certain guests at certain times if you come in prepared and you're very focused in on what the stories of the day are, and bring those stories to the host and say, this is what I think is a hot button topic that we should be talking about, and not let it just be kind of free form wherever the host wants to take it. So the producer could play a much bigger role if he or she really wants to. And then the Fox Sports radio stuff, correspondent, that kind of went away. I think the internet killed that job a little bit. Because I was pretty much a stringer, and you guys may know the history of, New York sports stringers that went to the games, they sat in the press box, and then they would get sound after the game, send them out to all the outlets. And my job for Fox Sports Radio was doing in-game updates, which you really don't need anymore, right? You don't necessarily have to go live to the stadium to hear, what the score is of the Giant Eagle game in the first quarter. But we did that, and then my responsibility was kind of producer-like. I used to be able to they paid me more money to actually get a guest on afterwards than they did for actually the on-air updates. So I'd have to kind of wait and ask a star of the game to see whether or not they would jump on live with the radio host back for Fox Sports Radio for a few minutes. And if I got that, I got $75. If I didn't, I went home with just $50. And that's the way that went for a long time. I used to do that for baseball as well. And between the Whitestone Bridge and other tolls, and then paying for a meal at Yankee Stadium, if I didn't get the guest, I think sometimes I ended up losing money covering the game.
Great stuff. You mentioned Bob Aarons earlier, how he was your first real mentor. Do you have any favorite memory with Bob, or was there one area that he really helped you in when you were honing your craft?
The best memory, I'll say, was over the course of several days, which was, I'm not sure if either of you have yet been able to go. Obviously, with COVID, it got canceled, but the trip to Cooperstown. And I knew that was always a special trip. That was a great class as well, because it was Gary Carter. So as a Met fan, Gary Carter, Eddie Murray was in that class, who also played for the Mets, but obviously known for the Orioles. And then Bob Uecker got the Ford C. Frick Award that year as well. And Bob had connections with a gentleman named Merle Harmon that he used to be a spotter for back in the day when he used to be in the booth for Jet games. So we were able to interview Bob Uecker prior to going to Cooperstown, and talked about the movie Major League and his time on TV and what he's done with the Milwaukee Brewers broadcast. And that was a big thrill. Through John Cirillo, who you may know is still a professor at Fordham, Johnny Cigar PR. He was doing the PR for Gary Carter at that time. And I was able to get a 15-minute one-on-one interview with Gary Carter at Gallagher Steakhouse. This is all before we go to Cooperstown. And then you have that great weekend on the golf course, interviewing Hall of Famers, spending time with Bob, I was with Ben Schrader and Rich Savino, setting up at the Hall of Fame, doing a live show. So that kind of trip is one major memory, but there are so many moments. I mean, Bob would walk me out back to my car or his car, and then the conversation would go another 30 or 45 minutes at his door, because he just never stopped teaching and mentoring and learning. And I think what's different between a teacher and a mentor is, at a certain point of the relationship, you need to be willing to be an open book and be willing to hear any criticism as well, and know that Bob has your best interest in mind. When he was saying those things, it was to make you better, even if you didn't understand it always at that time. I didn't do everything right. I was 19, 20, 21 years old, just like you guys, and you're going to make mistakes and have lapses in judgment, or, maybe put up an ear of arrogance, or I know what I'm doing occasionally. But he never lost patience with myself or any of us as well. And then also, I went back to him many, many times after school, when I was trying to find my way and whether or not I was going to pursue this full-time hard, or if I was going to make it what I've made it, which is something I do creatively, hobby-wise, make some money on the side, but not my primary job. And I was really wrestling with that, because I felt like I was giving up, or, I was disappointing people by not keep on pushing to see if I could, take it as far as I could. And he never judged me or never held me account to it, and always just was an open book and listened. And that was great. And I mean, just to show you the level of relationship Bob has with past students, he was at my wedding. He was at weddings of friends of mine who I attended. It meant that much. He was like a family member that you would want there. When I graduated, the day before I graduated, I got my first post-college job working for the New Haven County Cutters. They were part of the Can-Am League, an independent league team. And Bob came up to New Haven, Connecticut. He drove there and sat next to me as I did the middle innings, listening to me. And then we went to commercial. He would, give me a little detail or slide me something. I mean, who does that? But I think for a long, long time, the group of FUV students really was the lifeblood for him. And it kept him going, kept him in a sense young. And it's fantastic to be able to reminisce and connect with people that you don't know personally that have come after you or before you. It's kind of the linchpin. And that's what's been so special about Bob for so many years.
Yeah, he sounds incredible. I've only ever heard good stories about him. I came a little after his time, so I didn't ever get to really work with him, but I've only heard great things about him. And so kind of in this life lesson vein that you got from Bob Aarons, I'm kind of wondering, what is the greatest thing that you think you picked up from working at WFUV that really has stuck with you throughout all these different paths and different careers and different points in your life?
I think that life is about relationships in a lot of ways. And the relationships I formed there, they opened doors for me right after college, with positions at Sirius and other things. And every job I got in radio, and even every job I've gotten in the financial world that I do now, was built on relationships. And, I got a job at Sirius because Mike Yam was there and he put in a good word for me. I got a job with Fox Sports Radio because I interned at MLB.com, and Seth Everett was the host there. He couldn't do a job one weekend because he was covering Major League playoffs, and he gave me a chance. And I've seen so many other people kind of pay that forward as well. And the camaraderie of FUV students and the overall staff has been so strong that years and years later, you call anyone that had that FUV background, they'll do anything for you. And it doesn't necessarily have to be something specific to sports broadcasting. They'll help you in several different ways. And, you make sure you treat everyone fair, courteous to everyone, treat them the right way. And, that'll come back and pay dividends, I think, for you. Probably the one thing for those of you that are still in school and maybe have an option, Mike Breen came to us one time when I was a sophomore and I hadn't yet declared my major. And he said, if you are at FUV now, that is what you are majoring in when it comes to broadcasting and communications. So I would recommend majoring in something else, communications or something else. And I did not take that advice. I ended up, majoring in communications, and I probably wish I would have done something else, or maybe had a business background or something else. So maybe that's a piece of advice I wish I would have listened to that I did not.
Just one more thing. I mean, I know that you were the sports manager, and it's like, what is that, relationship like? Because obviously you're still a student, and you're still obviously really young in your career, but you're kind of like the boss, with everyone else. Like, what is that dynamic like? Was it an easy transition for you, like that type of stuff?
Yeah, it's interesting, right? It was the first kind of like authoritarian type role. I think my legacy might have been setting up the first FUV fantasy football draft. Might have been one of my bigger accomplishments. I think, we had a good group and we were friends, but there were times where that line between, the friendship and also being the sports manager of that group, occasionally you had to say things that, they maybe did not want to hear about, whether it be shifts or the conditions they left things or the quality of their radio cuts when they brought them back but I think what the value was and why I wanted to do it is I knew that it was going to get me into a more of an inner circle, which it did. Right. So I got more time with Mike Yam, who was the sports manager a year ahead of me. And then I got a lot more time with Bob. With more time with Bob meant more time to learn. So while there was the aspect of kind of being the person in charge, or whatever that may mean, of the group, to make sure that things are going the way they are and people are holding firm to their responsibilities and accountabilities, I also knew that was going to get me more time to learn and absorb and be more and have more opportunities. So that was, and then I remember it was a great legacy of people that have been sports managers. When we had the celebration for Bob, I don't know how many years ago it was now, they had a list of all the sports managers, and I was very proud to be among the very accomplished sports broadcasting names that were on that list.
Well, so kind of now moving out of your time from FUV and kind of into your after college years, I see that you worked at like various different jobs, but one that particularly struck out to me was the AFL New York Dragons play-by-play announcer. And so I kind of want to know a little bit more about that experience. How did that come about? And did you like it? I mean, no one really talks about the AFL that often. So I'm
Yeah, it's kind of, been defunct and kind of came back a few different times. And this kind of goes back to relationships. So Peter Schwartz, who's still a sports anchor on the New York scene, great guy, right? And he was one of those guys that was in the press box when I would cover Met games, Yankee games, Jets and Giants, etc. And we built a relationship. And he was the play-by-play announcer for the New York Dragons. And they ended up striking a deal with MSG to broadcast a certain amount of those games on TV. And Peter, being the great guy that he was, recommended me to the vice president of communications for the Islanders and Dragons, Christopher Botter, as someone that can fill those shoes. So I went to the Coliseum. I did a demo by myself and ended up doing 3 games for the Dragons during that season. One at the Coliseum on Long Island, and then I got to travel twice, once to Columbus, Ohio, once to Austin, Texas. And the games were on Radio Disney. Bob, of course, listened, called me right after the game was over. And I can say that I did play-by-play for a professional sports team. I got to be on the plane wasn't a chartered plane, but I got to be on the plane with the professional team. I got the stipend from the team on how much money I could spend over the course of the weekend. So that was a great experience. I had moments over the course of my post-college career that I could have pursued harder. And this is, so I did minor league baseball right after college. I had an opportunity and job offer to do AA baseball with the Connecticut Defenders. And I also had another opportunity to do women's college basketball as well. Both times I turned it down. And I remember seeing Gary Cohen, who was covering and broadcasting for Seton Hall basketball at the Big East tournament. I was there covering it for Fox. And I told him that, I had gotten this job offer from the Connecticut Defenders. They were the AA team of the San Francisco Giants. They were up by like Foxwoods Resort and Casino in Connecticut. And I told them, well, they wanted me to do three innings and no traveling on the road. And it was only going to be $700 a month and there was no board. So I didn't know how I was going to figure that out. And he said, Joe, if you turn that down, you just may not really want it as bad as you think you do. And you know what? He was right. Ultimately, the lifestyle of what it would required to do that job, the nights and the weekends, is a very different type of lifestyle. Everyone else's leisure time is when you are on and when you are working, nights, weekends, holidays, etc. And there was always something in the back of my head that wasn't sure if I wanted to go down that road. And ultimately, I ended up kind of pivoting and doing something else, and that was okay. And I have plenty of very close friends that were either at FUV with me at the time I was at the school, or I knew like Ryan Rucco, who just came in afterwards, that have done great things. And, some of you may go in a completely different path. And there's a voice inside of you who goes, what would have happened if I would have went further? But, you have to make sacrifices to kind of succeed in this business. Some people will happen very, very quickly. Other people are going to be waiting very, very long. And you have to be prepared that if it takes longer than maybe your mind wanted it to, is that the lifestyle that you want to have? If it is, great, and continue to do it. If not, there's plenty of time to find a different way.
And I'm actually in Gabelli and like trying to weigh between like the business and, sports broadcasting and that stuff. So maybe a little more personal for me with your journey. And, when you maybe made that pivot over, to the business world, like how did you do that? Like, how did that come about? Like, was there any like specific thing that like, oh, I want to do this, and that kind of thing grew into your job?
Yeah, not really. So I, again, relationships. I started working full-time in sports public relations because I still was like, okay, well, if I'm not going to do in sports radio, maybe I want to work on the sports business side of things. And we had John Cirillo and Joe Favorito and these guys that were great publicists that had Fordham pedigrees as well. I worked for John for a while. I covered a lot of boxing events, got to go to Vegas. I was in the ring, like HBO does the post-match interviews. I was in the ring getting quotes, trying to get myself on TV for like a half a second maybe before I did so. And then I worked for a company called Dan Clores Communications, and I was there for about a year, also working in sports PR. And I was not making a lot of money. And I think I was making $29,000. and I was going to get promoted that year to a junior account executive, and they were going to raise my salary to like 32. And I was like, and like, I'm an Italian kid from Brooklyn. So like, it was okay to be living at home with your parents after college, but not forever. So I started getting a little anxiety about that. And I had one of my good friends, Arthur, he was working at Morgan Stanley at the time. I was just talking about them, about how I was kind of worried about, how was I going to kind of make, better money working in this, how long it was going to take to do so. And they pretty much said, this guy's good attitude, good work ethic. On the interview, I told the person at Morgan Stanley that I had taken one business class at Fordham. It was a macroeconomics class, and I got a C- on it. I was a communications major, etc. But I told him, but I'll work really hard. I'll come in with a good attitude. And it was a contractor position, which is not a full-time position. But within 6 months, they converted me to full-time. And I was on my way. And honestly, the communication skills I learned just at Fordham and FUV helped me every single day. Like, if you want to be a leader in anything, you got to be able to bottle up a message and to talk to people. You need to be able to explain things to your team members. And then you have to be able to manage up to the most senior management within an organization to explain them clearly and concisely what it is they need, how to deliver it, etc. So, some of the things you're going to be learning at FUV, whether or not you're doing sports broadcasting or not, that's a skill set and intangibles and things that you're learning that the competition is not going to have, and that you could use to your advantage.
Yeah. So talking about your job and your kind of day job, but then your creative job on the side, how did you get started with your podcast? How was that something that you determined that you wanted to do? So
the Islanders overall, I'm not saying anything that you don't know, don't get a lot of national media attention. Sometimes they don't get a lot of local media attention, especially in, the years that they were not playing very well. I mean, that's changed in the last 2 or 3 seasons, but the Islanders were a non-playoff team or a first round and done team for many, many years. A lot of times the New York Post or Daily News would not even send a beat writer there. So there was always a craving amongst Islander fans for more content because there were so few places to get it nationally. So the Twitter account at IslesBlog belonged to someone named Connor Moore at the time, and he put out a tweet back in like 2014 that he was looking to expand his content and he was looking for podcasters. All right. I emailed him. I gave him my professional resume. I sent in, clips of me doing on-air play-by-play and on-air interviews, etc. And he called me up. He was like, I really wasn't expecting to get like anyone with professional experience, He's like, yeah, sure, you can do it. So I ended up doing that podcast for IslesBlog. Connor ultimately didn't want to keep up the account. I took over the account in 2015. So the Twitter account now has 14,000 followers. We do the podcast every single week. I'm now part of Lighthouse Hockey and the SB Nation podcast. They actually send me a check once a month for my podcasting duties, so I can say I get paid for this stuff now. And the Islander fan base is a really tight group of fans, and Islander and hockey fans overall are pretty hardcore. If you're a hockey fan, you're a hardcore hockey fan. There aren't many fair weather ones. So the level of engagement is off the charts. And I've been able to do a lot of really cool things. Certainly we've been able to get great guests in terms of ex-players and the announcers and, guys like Jigs McDonald, who I grew up listening to, and old players like Mick Vukota and Rich Pilon and many other Islanders and other national TV and radio hockey broadcasters. And even a few years back, I was selling merchandise, Islanders merchandise, and it was the last year of the Coliseum before they came back to the Coliseum. And we came up with a great charity item called It Happened at the Coliseum shirt. And we raised over $30,000 for Make-A-Wish Foundation with the help of the Islanders getting on board with that. So that's just been kind of what I've been able to do. It's a little bit tougher now. I got a 2.5-year-old and I got another little girl coming in June. So I don't see a lot of first periods these days. It's usually bath time. It's a little bit harder, but I've still, like last night, we just recorded one, from 10 to 11 o'clock at night. And my wife thinks I'm absolutely crazy to keep on doing this stuff, but I can't quit it. And I'm really proud of what we've been able to build. And it just, you have the ability to have a voice and find relevancy with the way social media is set up. And you don't have to, and I have not been kind of I don't say exaggerated things. I don't say terribly controversial things to get noticed. I'm very consistent with the type of content I put out there, try to make it smart, try to make it witty, try to be able to touch on the past while talking about the present, bring on interesting guests, and you build over the time, you're going to build a following, and people become loyal to that following, and you kind of become part of the fabric of what Islanders have been able to do. So hopefully I can do that for many, many more years. And if I'm not doing it myself, being on air, I want to definitely be kind of part of something that continues what I've been able to build over the last 5 or 6 years.
One more question before we sign off today. I just wanted to ask you if you have one more piece of advice for someone entering the sports media industry.
I think my advice would be that you need to be patient. It's a subjective business, as you guys know. And a lot of it is luck, but at the same time, there's a great Branch Rickey quote, the general manager of the Dodgers who brought in Jackie Robinson. He said, "Luck is the residue of design." And you got to kind of have the hard work and the opportunity, and eventually those things will converge. I think there is, and even I look back at my own story, I think back at 25, 26 is when I really started to say, I think this isn't moving quick enough for me. I need to move on. I think that was probably too fast. I don't think I realized how much time I had to kind of maybe switch things and still have a very productive career in doing something else. So if you come out of school and you're not Ryan Ruocco right away, you're not even starting to see guys like Justin Shackle. Like, he's got a really interesting story in what he's doing. And you could see it's building for him. It's still building. He's still waiting for that big thing that hopefully happens for him real soon. Andrew Bogish is another one where he's been extremely patient, still working at doing his play-by-play thing, but he's an anchor on CBS Sports Radio. If it's something you love and in your bones that this is the field and what you want to do, that you want to make something you love be what you do for a living, be patient with it. And again, I think to yourself, what type of lifestyle do I want? What concessions? Because there will be ones that I'm going to have to make. And if that fits for you, just stay down the steady path. I think a little bit longer than maybe you first, before you want to kind of get out of it, because I think you're just one big break away from taking an opportunity and taking it much further.
I think that's a good way to wrap up the podcast. And he is the host of the PT Isles podcast for SB Nation Lighthouse Hockey, also runs the NYIslesBlog.com and corresponding Twitter page at IslesBlog. Thank you for coming on, Joe.
Thank you guys very much. Best of luck.